Hi guys, welcome back to Old Man Jacob Photography. This week, we're going to be looking at OM Systems' flagship camera, the OM-1. I'm going to show you why this camera is becoming very popular among macro photographers. We're going to go over some of its biggest advantages and weaknesses, and I'll give you my first impressions after using this camera for my first week. All right, let's get into it. All right, so I'm not going to go into spec details in this video, just more a general overview of what you can kind of expect from this camera, why people jump over to it, why I switched to it, or at least included it in the mix, and some of my first thoughts with it. Probably the main thing that's been attracting macro photographers to the OM-1 is its ability to in-camera stack. There's a setting on it where you can focus stack images. It'll take up to 15 images with a single press of the shutter, and it will actually stack them in camera for you. So you don't need Photoshop, Zerene Stacker, anything like that. I went ahead and tested that out. I'll give you my thoughts about that in a little bit, but that is a huge selling point for this camera. Another one of the main reasons that people have been switching over to this camera actually has nothing to do with the camera itself, but more of what the camera can do when it's paired with the new lenses. This lens is the M.Zuiko 90mm f3.5 2x IS Pro. That's a mouthful. There's also a 60mm 1:1 Pro lens that Olympus has, and a lot of people are using that. The big deal about this lens is that it's the world's first autofocus 2:1 macro lens. That's a big deal because when you mix it with the in-camera focus bracketing, you can set up near perfect stacks just by simply pressing the shutter. It will automatically take photos at set points, as many photos as you need, and then you can take those into other software later and stack them into magnificent focus stacks. Something that would have been incredibly difficult before has now been made a ton easier. So you'll notice a theme: focus stacking. Whether it's in camera or whether it's the focus bracketing mixed with these lenses, that is probably the main reason people have been eyeballing this. The other thing is it's a micro four thirds sensor, which gives you an effective 2x magnification compared to a full frame sensor. So you mix that with this M.Zuiko 2:1 lens, you have the equivalent of 4:1 magnification. You can then take, as I've been doing, a Reynox DCR 250 on the end of it. Now you've got closer to like 7:1 magnification. Those are kind of the main things that have switched most people into looking at this camera. They're definitely the things that pushed me to try this thing out. And we've got a cat. So the in-camera focus stacking, you have to be very, very still, and your subject has to be very, very still, or it'll just say that the stack was failed. Also, it saves the in-camera stacks as a JPEG, so you lose a little bit of your ability to alter the image after the fact. And it does sometimes leave some artifacts in the JPEG. Because of these reasons, I actually almost immediately quit using the in-camera focus stacking. The focus bracketing works splendidly, and I can get better results after the fact using Photoshop and Zerene Stacker. So as far as the way this camera feels, it is very, very comfortable. The buttons are laid out in a super intelligent way. Basically everywhere your fingers rest, there's a button right there. But because the grip is so large, you're not applying pressure to those points unless you need to. At least with my hand, I've got kind of medium large hands, and this camera just fits beautifully in my hand. The camera itself is pretty light. The camera is waterproof, dustproof, blah, blah, blah. I haven't actually taken it out in any inclement weather, so I have no comment on that. Okay, so I've been using this camera for 1 week now. I've taken, I don't know, maybe 10,000 pictures or so, which sounds like a lot, but with the focus bracketing mode, I mean, you can take 100 pictures at a time. So it's very easy to go out for an hour and come back with 1,500 photos. My first impressions of this thing, I'm super, super impressed with how comfortable this camera is. I'm happy with the way that the menu is laid out. It's super easy to navigate, very intuitive. You can even set up your own custom menu for things you get to all the time. I haven't had to do that. I've just kind of programmed everything to all these buttons. Literally, I can change anything at my fingertips. So this camera has the ability to do a lot of cool things besides its focus bracketing and focus stacking, which most people are talking about. It also has a Pro Mode feature where when you hold the shutter down halfway, it'll continuously take images and save them to memory. And then when you press the shutter, it'll commit the last X amount of images, however many you set, 15 we'll say, plus the one you just took. It'll commit all of those to memory. So I know that's kind of confusing, but what it means is that when you're trying to take a picture of, say, a bee, it's sitting on a flower and you want to get a picture of it as it's flying off. That's a really hard image to capture. With this Pro Mode, you can hold the shutter down halfway, waiting until it flies off, and then as soon as you see it fly, you push the shutter. Your reaction time is probably going to be too slow. You're going to miss the shot, but it just saved the past X number of seconds, whatever you set, to memory also. So that means you can go back a few shots and you actually have that moment captured perfectly. You're going to need really good light for this because it does not work, at least so far. I haven't found a way to get it to work with the flash, so that's sort of the downside. For bird photography or something, it'd be amazing. So some of the biggest disadvantages, or things that I was hearing were disadvantages, basically came down to two things. One, it has, in theory, poor low light performance, and two, it's only 20 megapixels. Neither of those is going to be a problem for me. The low light performance, what they mean is that there's a lot of noise in low light conditions. That shouldn't concern anybody in this day and age. There are so many noise reduction programs that work so well using AI that noise doesn't matter anymore. So most of us in macro photography are going to be using a flash. So 90% of the time, we're going to have our ISO set to 200 or 100, or, the base for this camera is 200. And your flash is just going to take care of the exposure, so you're not going to have any noise really anyways. As far as only having 20 megapixels, so far, that doesn't seem like it's going to make any difference to me. Even if you're using the new Sony A7R5, with its huge megapixel count, you're not going to fill that entire frame, most likely. A lot of people are going to be using crop sensor mode, which cuts it down to 24 megapixels. And then even within that, you're probably going to be cropping down. So by the time you end up, your final image is going to be like 20 megapixels. You're cropping away all the rest. This camera, I have not had to crop. I'm used to cropping on my Sony every time to get the subject to fill up the frame or get the composition correctly. I can get it in camera now. I haven't cropped a single one of my images other than to change it to a square, cropping a slight bit off the edge to throw on Instagram or something. So anyways, it's lower megapixels, sure, but the final image for me ends up at the same megapixels. So I've noticed no reduction in image quality from noise or from resolution. So I've found myself actually still shooting in manual focus mode simply because it's what I'm used to. The autofocus works pretty well, but it does have kind of a downside to using it. If you use the autofocus, it'll get your subject in focus, but I don't know what magnification it's in focus at. Am I at 2:1 when it goes into focus, or am I, out farther? So it's easier for me to just shoot in manual focus, line it up how I've always lined it up, and then if I want to, then I can use that focus, the autofocus, to maybe fine tune it just a little bit. So anyways, I know this has been kind of long-winded. I'm going to do another video after I've used this a little more than a week. But for now, my first thoughts is this is a great camera. If I was just starting out in macro photography, would I go straight for this camera, or would I go with a crop sensor camera with a Laowa lens? That's hard to say. If you know that you're going to be serious about macro photography, there's no doubt in my mind that this is the best setup for macro photography right now. That being said, if you're just getting into macro photography, I'm not sure that I would put the investment into this setup. With the lens, the camera body, the flash, everything, you're looking at about $4,000. For about $1,000, you can get a Sony a6000 and a Laowa 2X lens, and Mikey MK320 flash, and you can take pictures that honestly are going to come out pretty much just as good. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.